Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of our malicious compliance. Boss introduces new time tracking tool to avoid time manipulation, backfires on him. I work in a small startup company of around 12 people. It's a very good atmosphere in the office and everyone pulls their weight and is super motivated. However, our boss likes to micromanage us, even though he has no expertise in any of our fields: marketing, design and accounting. Especially us in marketing and design suffer a lot from that, since he will make changes to our strategies, posts and website, sometimes without telling all of us, and then gets upset at us when the customer feedback is bad and we aren't reaching our predicted goals. So recently, he told us that the reason he thinks we aren't seeing enough results is because we are manipulating our hours and not actually putting in the work we should. Until then, we each wrote down our hours manually in an Excel sheet, but with the new time tracking tool, he would see how long we were working down to the minute. We also could only log in on our desk PCs and previously approved home office devices, but not mobile, because if you are not at your desk, it is not work. After our initial shock passed and our boss left for the day, our manager called for a meeting and we came up with a plan. We would do as he says, in the most just following the rules way possible. 1. We would not engage in work-related conversations with him unless we are sitting at our desks and are clocked in. 2. Any questions by him which are asked after we are clocked out will only be answered once we clock in again the following day. 3. Every phone call, text message, or otherwise work-related things outside of the office would only be answered once there was an option for us to clock in, either next day in office, or for some of us on our home office device. 4. Since we no longer have the option to shift time manually, all work minutes and hours would be clocked exactly when they took place. Side note, in my country, weekends pay better, Sundays have to be paid double, and working after 8 p.m. warrants additional financial benefits by law. Previously, if we needed to post something real quick or had a question, we would just add the weekend hours or late time to the upcoming Monday. Basically out of goodwill. But no more of that. 5. We would stop any independent activity, like posting on social media or writing an email, and would send him everything to approve before following through. After about a week, our boss was so fed up with this, he gave us the option to clock in from our mobile devices, so he could get a more immediate response to his questions. However, this of course led to us clocking in ways more frequently, since, as I said, he likes to micromanage and is therefore asking a lot of questions. I'm happy to report that as of 2024, we have abolished the system again and regained most of our independence. And even though our boss is still pissed about how we exploited the system, it brought the team closer together and hopefully taught him a lesson. Next story. You don't believe that I'm asthmatic? Okay. I attended high school in a very polluted city. The campus had two of the most saturated streets in my city. For P, there was a mandatory race we had to do every Q, and it consisted of swimming 40 semi-Olympic pools and then running 5 laps around the school. We were supposed to finish the swimming and then just put shoes on and a shirt and start running, no time to get dry clothes. Also, this city is well above 8.6k feet, 2,600 meters, above sea level and fairly cold. I explained to the teacher that it would not be a good idea for me to do that as I have asthma, and between the cold, damp clothes, and pollution, it was not a good idea and that I should only do one of the two. She said, "If you don't do this, you'll fail my class, school policy." I said okay. I then did everything as expected and I lost my breath in the middle of the 3rd lap. Long story short, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks recovering. My family sued the teacher and the school. She then lost her job. Next story. I wasted 2 hours of my sister's time because she refused to listen to me. When I was younger, around a decade ago, I used to love 2 things: cars and roads. Still to this day I love cars, but the way I loved roads was through maps. My favorite activity when I was bored was to go on the Maps app and look at the highways that surrounded my area. My oldest sister at the time was the only sibling of mine who had a license. One summer day, she was bored and decided to take me and her boyfriend to an amusement park an hour and a half away from home. The story begins on the way back. My father needed the car at the car dealership as it was scheduled to have routine maintenance done the next morning. My father sent her the address of the dealership and requested that she drop the car off, and he will go and pick us up at the dealer. Now that the context is out of the way, here is where my sister made a mistake. She typed in the address and clicked on the nearest place with that road. The issue is that the nearest place with that road was a town going an hour in the opposite direction. She gets onto a road I will call State Route 100. This intersects with Interstate 1, which we were supposed to get onto. When she passes the highway, this following interaction ensues. Me, you were supposed to make that right. Her, that's not what the map says. 5 minutes later, I say again. Me, we are heading in the wrong direction, this does not go home. Her, maybe it's an alternate route that's faster? Me, I don't think a road going in the opposite direction is fast. She cut me off. Her, now annoyed, listen, I'm going to focus on what the map says, not on you. Just stop already. And with that, I followed her instruction. After all, why would I complain on going on a road I have never been on? From what I remember after that, we stopped for gas about half an hour in. My sister was still convinced we were going in the right direction, but why should I correct her? She is listening to the map after all. The fallout. We hit an expressway and my sister is convinced we made it home and is pleased with herself. This was until an overhead sign said Townby Regional Airport, 1 mile. At this point, my sister realized her mistake. She starts freaking out and saying I didn't know this road went here? I was following the map. Opie, why didn't you tell me we were going the wrong way? I was scared of her getting mad at me, so I just said after you told me to stop I just stopped paying attention to where you were going. She eventually pulled into a gas station and saw where she set her GPS to. After correcting her mistake, we head the opposite direction, although the car ride was rather silent. We eventually see signs for the amusement park we started at, because she had to turn left at the road I originally told her to turn at. And that is how I turned a drive supposed to be an hour and a half into a 3.5-hour journey. Years have passed since this happened, and I told my father, who thought it was hysterical. I often consider telling my sister, but we sadly rarely speak anymore. Thank you for reading. Have a happy new year. Next story. Don't bother you anymore. Fine, I won't. I used to live in an apartment building that had shops on the main level. The building next door was the same. The two buildings shared a wall. My building had assigned parking in yellow paper notes to put in our car windows. A restaurant opened up in the building next door. Their owner, manager, and staff began parking in my spot as well as our neighbors. I spoke to the owner, and she said she would talk to them again, but didn't think it would help. They were even parking in her spot. Every night, I would get home, call them and ask that the vehicle be moved. I was getting tired of this, when one night they put the manager on because they were busy and didn't have time to deal with my request. He did do it, but told me they wouldn't do it again and I was to stop calling them. I suggested they stop parking in my assigned spot. He told me he had too many staff to control where they parked, and he was sure they were not parking in my spot and it was probably a customer. You know, because customers always park behind a business and then walk around to the front to get in. The next time I worked evening shifts. I got home and this time there was a Range Rover parked in my spot. I dutifully called the tow truck and not the restaurant. I had to wait for a second tow truck because the first one was not equipped to move a vehicle of that type. Something about being jacked up and stuff. They explained it and the wait was because I didn't know enough to be able to answer their questions about the truck so they could send out the right truck first. They towed it, and I went in and went to bed. A few hours later I was awakened by a phone call from the towing company. I had towed the owner and he was telling them that it was his parking spot and that I had no right to tow him. They were going to bill me for the tow. I told the caller about my landlord's parking permits, the numerous phone calls to have them move, about being told not to bother them anymore, and that his restaurant was in the next building with a separate parking lot. We said goodbye and I never heard anything more about it. I also was able to park in my spot after. I told my neighbor and he told me just to be safe, I should tell the owner of the other building. I popped into her shop and told her. She replied with something to the effect of, "You towed the Range Rover?" I said yes. She started to laugh and basically said good for you and told me to was the restaurant owner's truck. Still makes me smile when I think of it. Next story. Wheel, if you are quoting company rules, I'll follow them exactly as it is. This was done by ex-colleague. Will, this happened a few years ago, when I was working as a techno manager in an Indian startup IT firm. It was a small firm with less than 50 employees and there were two founders. Let's call them Vicky and Joel. Vicky had worked a short time in an MNC, but was not able to stand authority and had to resign, whereas Joel had no real workplace experience. Vicky managed the place like a king, show tantrums, anger, etc. Joel was simply a yes man to Vicky. Now we had an HR lady, who was okayish with the older employees and strict with the newer ones. As for me, I was not that good technically compared to my colleagues but was good at people management. Also, I was one of the longest serving employee too. I was friendly with most of the employees, especially the new ones. This was due to the fact that I knew it was not easy to work with the founders and I wanted the show to continue as it was my first company too. So a new joinee, named Bob, joins and after 6 months he is assigned to a project. Because of the time zone difference he worked up to 4 to 5 a.m. and the client too was happy with him. Since he was sleeping late, this guy always reported at nearly 11:30 a.m. in office. Out of the blue, founder calls me in HR and asks that why Bob is late to office and said he has to be in office by 10 a.m. as other guys. By the way, forgot to mention Vicky and Joel came into office only once in a while and it was pre-corona times, but since they are founders, let's ignore that. HR lady took the responsibility of asking Bob about that. At this point, since HR lady is not aware of Bob's working hours, I interrupted and told that he's leaving the office by only 2 to 4 a.m. and it's kind of unfair to ask him to come early. Vicky cut me and says, no, he has to follow rules and this is the basic etiquette when working in this office. I said okay. HR lady calls Bob in her office and questions him about the timings, to which Bob says, okay, ma'am, we'll comply. Now Bob and me have a good rapport and he comes directly to me and tell me what happened with the HR. Then I ask him, what are you going to do? To which he says, I will ask for a clarification via mail and then we'll comply. I understood where it's going and give him a best of luck, trying hard to contain my laughter. After 10 minutes, HR comes to me with her laptop in panic and show me the mail which Bob has sent. He has said the founders, the client head he's reporting to, and have written something in lines of this, hi client head name, this is to inform you that as a request from my office to comply to the office timings, from tomorrow onwards, my work timings would be 10 a.m. IST to 7 p.m. IST, i.e. 10:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. Chicago time. I request you to change your meeting times to the times when I am available, and if any inconveniences, please contact HR, Vicky or Joel. Thanks, Bob. I asked the HR if this was somewhere mentioned in the offer letter and she nods yes. I tell her to take the matter to Vicky. At Vicky's room, since the narcissist guy he is, scolds HR for not nothing this in the offer letter. Then asks her to correct this. She goes to Bob and asks for correction, to which Bob firmly says no to. HR lady, being stupid, tells that she told this because Vicky asks her to, and Bob still stands firm and asks HR if Vicky have said it, then ask Vicky to formally reply in the mail thread asking to revert to his old timings. Bob also says that he is not going to get back to old timings unless Vicky mails, and they have approximately 4 hours to do so before the client reacts. HR comes to me for help and we go together to Vicky's room and brief. Vicky lash out at HR, and at this point I interrupt and says, it's better to address the issue as in 4 hours client will get involved and we have to take a decision before that. Vicky hesitantly sent out the mail saying it was a mistake as Bob's special case was not considered during the decision making and Bob can continue his earlier timings. As I walked back to office, I saw Bob looking at me and laughing really hard, and I had to hold a straight face as HR lady was also behind me. Needless to say, Bob has his timings intact. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.